We're starting with the new season of The Cleaning Lady, season four. Can you give us some insight into where we pick up and what it's like for Chris?
Yeah, well, I mean, since the last time we picked up from the third season, I believe that Chris had just met his father. He's getting in touch with his culture a little bit more. This whole situation between um, getting deported with his mom and meeting Camilla.
Mhm.
His life is kind of flipped upside down in the sense of like he's experienced so many things that no teenager should ever have to experience, or any person for that matter. But it's weird because I think in the third season, in the midst of him experiencing some of the craziest things, from the immigration and crossing the border and getting stranded on the desert.
Mhm.
Um, at the same time, he's also experienced a bit of normalcy in life, in which, like meeting someone like Camilla. I think that there's nothing like catching feelings for someone while you're crossing the border and getting stranded in the desert. That's we call that trauma bonding.
There you go.
Um, but yeah, it's definitely something that was very traumatic, but also eye opening. I think for
Mhm.
Chris,
Mhm.
and I'm glad that he had that. And I think stepping into this fourth season, he's kind of adjusting into that new sort of phase of his life.
Gotcha. That's good. Okay. All right. So
Yeah,
we have a good table setting there. Backing up a
yeah,
little bit, like,
yeah.
can you tell us how you first landed the role of, Chris De La Rosa and like what that was like as far as like the audition or the casting process?
Yeah. Well, back in 2020, I had auditioned for this, through self-tape. The pandemic had just been a thing. And my hair was long, and that was the first year that I ever had long hair ever in my
Mhm.
life. And I was like, this is gonna be interesting. I don't know how, because for me, I'm like, I don't know how this is gonna work. I've never really went to auditions with hair like this. I definitely look a lot different.
Mhm.
Um, and I had an audition with our first director, David,
Mhm.
and he's a character. He's hilarious. He's super sweet. And I had done the audition with my sister, and I remember, with self tapes, it was the first time we ever did like self tapes, in general,
Mhm.
and sent one in. And then a few weeks later, got a call back, a director session, and I had a talk with David and our casting director, and did the scene. He gave me some notes. Redid the scene again.
Mhm.
I think it was the scene where I had talked with my mom, and I was kind of like giving her a little attitude,
Mhm.
and he was like, I want to see more of like you're annoyed with your mother, and he was just like directing me in the sense,
Mhm.
and at that point, then you kind of just you end the call and you just shrug your shoulders, and you're like, all right, on to the next. And then my manager called me and was like, they want you for the pilot and it shoots in New Mexico. And I
Mhm.
was like, and I kid you not, I was like in disbelief the whole time because I was like, I don't know, part of me, like, it's a terrible mindset, but I'm like, I set myself up for disappointment sometimes and, kind of
Mhm.
expect the reality of things. Sometimes you're not the right look. Anything could happen. The odds of
Mhm.
not getting it is generally bigger, in the sense.
Right.
And usually I'm just not, being Asian, I most of the time I'm not the right look for
Mhm.
a lot of roles.
Mhm.
And so I was like, okay, great. And then when my manager called me, he was like, they want you for the role. I was like, are you sure? I was like, are they going to change their mind? And I'm on the way to the airport. I'm like, what is happening? And then, I got to set. They're
Mhm.
walking us around the stage and everything like that. It's a new show. And I'm like, I honestly, it was still like unreal for me. And
Mhm.
then yeah, shot the pilot for like I think like a week or two, and then I remember I was in Hawaii when Sebastian and Valentino's father, the boys who played Luca in the first couple of seasons, he
Mhm.
called me. He was like, "Did you see that we got picked up?" And I was like, "What?" He was like, "Yeah, we got picked up." And I was like, Oh. And he was like, that means we're coming back for a whole season. And I was like, are you sure? And again, on the way to the airport, this means like I'm living in New Mexico for like 6 months, and again, still felt surreal.
Mm.
Signing the like me and my manager was like, what is happening? Everything just happened so quickly.
Yes.
Um, and then it wasn't until I signed the series regular contract that I was like, oh, this is real. This is
Yeah.
really real. And then from then, I guess the rest is history.
There you go. I mean, yeah, I'll be honest. I've been following, the series trajectory a little bit, and I was surprised and impressed as well when I saw like the reaction to the pilot in the first season. There's been a lot of
Yeah.
sort of you guys were a surprise hit. I'll just say it, right? And I think like it's got to be gratifying, especially for a cast of, there's obviously some veterans. Your lead actress, Elodie Young, is, very well established, but there's a lot of people like yourself who are like, this is like your first big thing, and it's just like, bam. How has that been like coming onto a show and being like a series regular for the first time?
It's really humbling, and very gratifying. Like I think throughout this process, I've learned so much, even from just acting with Martha. Um, I've learned so much about the industry. I've learned so much about just really assuring that this is something that I want to do.
Mm,
I think being a series regular kind of feels like going to college, like getting accepted to a university,
mm,
where you step into a place that you've worked so hard to be in, and it's at the same time, while it's acknowledging the work that you've put in to be here, you're also still having to work harder and harder every single day just to match up with your castmates and to prove to yourself that this is what you want, this is what is worth it, and you have to show up to work. You have
mm,
to show up to work every single day at your best. Otherwise, it'll read on screen. And
right.
so part of that has just been so incredibly um I'm just so appreciative, and I'm so honored, and I owe it all to God. Like for me, I think that
Mhm,
you know putting being able to be given all these gifts and not knowing where to place them and not knowing where to put them, and then God is sort of kind of giving me an opportunity to not just show it, but to also grow within myself. And I've also learned a lot about myself from the show,
mm,
and it's just been really, really, really incredible. And also to say that um, to learn in a show like this,
mhm.
where we're spreading a message and a story that is bringing awareness to the undocumented, and what it's like to live, especially in this day and age now.
Mhm.
It's really powerful, and I feel like the way that they've structured it in the first couple of seasons is probably why the pilot was such a unexpected hit. You
Exactly.
know?
Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense. It's some relevant stuff that, even besides the sort of like heightened, like high concept,
Yeah.
crime drama aspects, it's relevant themes that we can all relate to in terms of like identity and immigration and whatnot. Speaking of
Yeah.
relating, I was going to ask you, do you see aspects of Chris's personality in yourself, or are there aspects of you that you bring to
A thousand
Chris?
percent. 1,000%. I mean, it's funny. I think whatever happens to Chris tends to just happen to me in real life.
Mm,
In the sense of just like the the checkpoints of Chris's life. I just there's a lot of similarities, but I think I relate to a lot of my younger life with Chris.
mm,
Like I think that the relationship I had with my mom when I was younger, as like a true like 16-year-old,
mhm,
I stemmed a lot of that sort of experiences into Chris with his
mhm,
relationship and Martha, or I guess you can say Fiona in the show,
mhm,
and um and it's great. It's like, because off screen, me and Fiona, or me and Martha, are very similar to how me and my mom are. We laugh and we're just like, we bicker and whatnot. But in the show,
mhm,
me and Chris and Fiona are very much like me and my mom when I was
mhm.
younger. And so I think there is a bit of like, there's the urge of wanting to do things and you can't do it. And you're like, oh, like there is that sort of like genuine aspect that I've experienced my whole life, as a kid, because when you're younger, you only see the small picture, and I think
Mhm.
that's how Chris is. And I think as he gets older, he starts to step a few steps, takes a few steps back further, and
Mhm.
realizes like there's a bigger picture to all of this. And I think he's really stepped into that with the fourth season at least.
Mhm. So relating to that, actually, Chris has faced, some significant challenges over the course of the series.
Yeah.
Um, has there been any storyline in particular that you found like most meaningful to portray or like has affected you more than others?
I will say, I think last season, well, the first season definitely was just like the most relatable in my opinion.
Mhm.
Whether that's your teenager's relationship with mom or like the reality of like you can't get your driver's license if you're not documented. Like just things like simple things like that when you're at the age where you can start driving, but it's like you can't drive, you can't get your license. You're like, damn, you know.
Mhm.
But I think in terms of like the most powerful story was when last season my mom goes back to the Philippines and I'm like I need to go back and then meeting my father and understanding the story behind that and then trying to get back to the States and then like being stranded like that's real. All of that is so real. And
Mhm.
that's the craziest part is like usually when you put on a show or when you put on, a movie or film or whatever that may be, certain things are a bit exaggerated. But what's
Mhm.
crazy is that in this aspect and in this story, this is real. It's something that people have gone through before. And I think
Mhm.
that's what makes it so crazy for me to feel like, when there's no water here and when there's no water there and you realize you're like wow we take things so much for granted
Mhm.
and 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 there are people out there that are going through things like that to me feels like I really hope I'm justifying the act of this
Mhm.
because it's a serious thing and I'm honored to be able to sort of represent that but it also opens my eyes as well as just like as an actor and as a
Mhm.
person. Um, yeah, it's really cool.
Makes sense. So with that in mind, I was curious, like, how do you prepare, given that, the cleaning lady has some intense moments, intense storylines, intense themes, like, how do you prepare emotionally for some of those more like challenging scenes you have to work through?
I mean, I think it's either imagining whether if that was you, if there's no cameras around,
Hmm.
there's no lines, there's no script, it's just this. And say you are stranded in the desert. Just the thought of that what it gives you sort of like a oh God, and if you're dehydrated, like just like obviously you don't have to force yourself to be dehydrated, but it's like the thought of just like if you're thirsty and you can't have water. Oh, that's like awful, So like I think it's either imagining yourself like you almost have to take yourself out of the character and being like, okay, it's no longer Chris in the desert. It's Sean in the desert. Your name is just Chris,
Hmm.
you know? Um and then in other cases, whether if it's like I've killed someone, right? And I'm like obviously I'm like I've never killed anyone, so like how do I like cover from that? Um I think knowing what emotions it obviously carries, you're scared, you're traumatized, you're like overthinking things. I'm like we've all had that before. So it's like rather than and like if I'm overthinking something, I'm like obviously I've never overthought killing someone in my real life, but I'm like I've overthought before in the past. So it's like what habits and what ticks and what thoughts and what ways do I have I done that before in the past and how can I implement that into the same exact situation? Um because my overthinking in my real life is real
Hmm.
and if I use those real thoughts into a more theatrical and specific altered molded different situation, even if it's not real my feelings are still real. So that's definitely how, at least for me, the way I go about it. And Martha's also, like I said, she's been such a great mentor for me throughout the show,
Hmm.
where she's just shown me what it's like to be real. When I have scenes with her, I'm just so present. I see her, I see Martha, I talk
Hmm.
with her, and it's like it's as simple as that.
There you go. Since you mentioned that, actually, I was going to ask you, like, as a young actor coming into this, ensemble, um, have there been any like really valuable lessons you've learned from your more experienced castmates? I'm guessing probably yes.
I think one thing that I've learned has definitely been like timing.
Mm,
I think timing and tone, like where it comes from, like how loud can you say this, like how loud do you speak these lines, or how softly do you speak these lines, and then like how
mm,
quickly do you say them, because at the end of the day it is a show, it is a show. So like if you were to be in real life and you really have to think, that's not great for the audience to watch. It just feels long unless it's like meant for you to think.
mm.
And another thing for me was also like um I think, what was it, timing, tone. Um,
Is there a third T?
Possibly. Um, I remember one time Martha had kind of mentioned to me, because there was like a very emotional scene, and we had both like, just she can cry the heck out of her like easily. She's got so much water in those eyes. For me, it's a little bit more difficult, and I remember her. She's just being like, if you can't cry, then you just don't cry. I was like,
Mm,
what do you mean? She's like, well, there are forms of sadness. You don't crying is just one of them. So
mm,
like if you can't cry, your character just doesn't cry. That's just how it is. Like it doesn't necessarily mean it's not right. And when I thought about that, I was like, oh, interesting. Because it's you can still be so traumatized by something or so sad about something, and sometimes you don't
mm,
really cry. And so that was one of those things where I was just like, that was really, really cool to think about. Oh, the other thing I remembering, it's just listening. I
mm,
think that you think of it less about like, oh, I have these lines to remember, and more so like, oh, what are they saying that makes me have to say something else?
mm.
Um, so yeah, just a bunch of little sprinkles that I've again grown to learn throughout the season.
Makes sense. It's important to be organic in the moment. I remember, I think it was on the first Percy Jackson film, Logan Lerman improvised the scene at the end where he doesn't hug his dad because in the actual script it says they hug, and it's like I'm not hugging, and it's
Oh
like
yeah, 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 yeah,
sometimes,
yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah, sometimes you just have
Great.
to like kind of like do something that's authentic to you slash the character, even if it's like not, quote unquote, what people had in mind. And if it works, it works.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that only happens when you've fully become the character, because the character
Mm,
knows what he wants. Not
mm,
not, when you know the character and you become the character, it's like the
mm.
character is now you. So what would you do? Not what are
Exactly.
you being told to do.
Right. Has there been, speaking of being told things, has there been any particular like feedback or reactions you've gotten from fans or the audience about your character or the series that really stood out to you?
I think the most I think the most common reaction I've had is just like, "You're not Filipino?" And I'm like, "I am not." They're like, "Holy crap! What? How is that? Like, what? I thought you were Filipino this whole time." And I'm like, well,
Your
yeah.
Tagalog is
Uh,
clearly impressing some people.
some people, I will say, it's quite
Not
obvious some
all.
people,
Not I
but
know. I
yeah,
know.
not all. But
I get it. Some people
yeah,
are
yeah, yeah.
sticklers. They get really sensitive about like, no, the
Very.
accent's wrong, this and that. But
Hey, but I understand it. I mean, that's why every time I have to go, like, um, I always ask the writers, I'm like, is this at least the right direction of what I'm saying? Because Chris, at the end of the day, too, Chris doesn't know fluent Tagalog. So it's like
mm,
it's not like he says perfect Tagalog. He didn't grow in the Philippines, and so
mm,
he is an American boy, like that is trying to learn his culture.
mm,
But yeah, I think the funniest reaction for me is that I've gotten so far. There's certain people where they'll look at me for like longer than a minute or two, and they'll be like, "Wait a minute." I'm like, "Hi." And it's funny because most of the time I'm usually recognized for my dancing.
mm,
Um, but to be recognized from Chris as the show is quite a new thing for me, and
mm.
it's very cool and
Nice.
very very appreciative.
Has there been any particular episode or scene from this season
Mm.
that you're really excited about for like a personal reason for the audience to see it?
Um, There's definitely one scene that's like
Mm,
considered the most dangerous act I've done as Chris.
mm,
I believe that might be the fifth episode or so, like in the middle of the season.
mhm,
Um, that's definitely really cool. But I think I have to say, um, the episode where I'm acting with Miss Leah Salonga,
mm,
uh, I think that's the second episode or so.
mhm,
That was probably one of my favorite episodes. I don't know. I think just being able to act aside from her, such a legend, and then there was this like tension, this awkward tension between me and Ted, the character Ted. Um,
mm,
it was just really fun to kind of exercise a little bit of like those underlying emotions
mhm,
um, that I'm really happy with, and I'm really, excited to see what people think of. But that in itself was just fun. So.
mm. Nice. So we've mentioned a lot of different cast members actually, but I wanted to actually focus in for a second on Elodie Young, our lead,
Mhm.
playing your aunt. How has your relationship with Elodie or Chris's relationship with his aunt Thony like evolved as the series has evolved?
Well, I mean, Chris has definitely held quite a few grudges on Tony. I think, in the beginning, Chris is a bit more clueless, and it's like, oh, my auntie. And I think as he obviously gets older and his ears perk up a little bit more, he realizes like that my mom is in deep shit because of her in a lot of situations, And as much as Tony is my aunt, Fiona is my mother, and we've been through a lot more together. And obviously, Tony's gonna put her son, first, in
Lucas,
which
yeah.
Fiona's gonna put me and Jazz first, and so it's vice versa. So then, I think in certain cases, Chris almost lost his trust to Tony
Mhm.
because he doesn't know what Tony's intentions are. I don't even think Tony knew, at a certain point, and so that makes him really skeptical about her,
Mhm.
and then I think as time goes by, Tony's trying to do right, and I think when that's all I think Chris wanted for his mom was for Tony to just prioritize his mom. He wanted Tony to prioritize Fiona,
Mhm.
a little bit more because Fiona has sacrificed so much for her, for Tony to be here and be in the States and help Luca, So I think that's really what it is. And then at this point now, he's not like lovey dovey with Tony, but he is definitely just more like, well, you're family at the end of the day, and you are my aunt. So there's still a bit of respect that goes around.
Mhm.
Um, and as long as you take care of my mom and you have her best intentions, you have her at your best intentions,
Mhm.
then I can't really ask for more.
Nice.
Yeah.
Beyond the Clean Lady, are there any recent projects or other creative pursuits that you're working on that have kept you busy?
Yeah. Well, I own a space called Fable in Burbank, which is an art wellness club for artists. It's kind of like a social clubhouse as well. But that's something that I've been really passionate about. We like opened our cafe in which like I curated the menu. And we have like directors and writers and singers and actors and dancers, like every medium of an artist that comes into the space. And
Nice.
it was inspired by the strike essentially, and we wanted people to feel like they had a space that they can always fall back to if, say, the industry fails them or if something happens to their lives. And it's all the way from a cold plunge in a sauna to like self tape rooms in an audio booth room. Like there's all these things that is available to our members, and this, even the coffee and the matcha. Like I. I'm a huge foodie and I grew up in China and Japan, so it's like
Mm,
I really wanted to source what I believe is
mm.
the most fitting, and we make like our, not to get nerdy, but we make all like our milks by hand because health is super important for me as well as an athlete. So
That's not
um
easy. I know that.
yeah
I've
so
heard that's not easy. Yeah.
yeah so every little detail in this space is, I run it with four of my partners, and they're also pioneers in the entertainment industry. So that's been a really fun thing to tackle, and to pursue. But other than that, I think as of now, just trying to I'm just trying to play around more in other films and other features, and see what I'm capable of, and see what I can do.
Nice. All right, let's wrap up here. One last thing I would ask.
Please.
Do you have anything to say to all the fans out there, supporters of your work, and Chris and the broader, I guess, cleaning lady family?
Yeah.
Anything? Yeah.
Well, I will say that I think, you know, don't set any expectations for the show. I think that even for me, the show is constantly keeping me on my toes. It's like you don't really know who's thinking what or what they really
Mhm.
want. Like I said, I don't even know if Tony knows what she wants sometimes, and I don't know what if Chris knows what he wants sometimes. And things can easily change. But I think that's the beauty of the show, and I'm excited for people to see what. I mean, the Clean Lady has come a long way. If you watch the first season to this season, it's almost like a completely different show.
Mhm.
And I think to that note, I would just suggest to watch everything with an open mind and expect the unexpected.
Nice. All right. So let me just hit